In this example, we're going to show you how to take a model and position it within a dish shape. We're going to focus on how to use the multiply as part of your setup to ensure that the model in the dish doesn't stick out above the zero plane. Then we're going to finish the demonstration by looking at some of the things that are important when calculating the toolpath for a dished or recessed model. So let's go to File, Close. So let's go and create a new file. So working with a single-sided job, I'm going to have a width of 10 inches, height of 8 inches, material thickness we're working with is 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to set the Z0 position of the material surface, XY datum position in the lower left hand corner, working with a high modelling resolution, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So let's start by drawing an ellipse for my dish shape. So we'll use the Draw Ellipse option. I'm just going to find the centre of my job. Okay, so you can see I'm snapping to that centre point there, and I'm going to click, drag the shape out, look at my cursor, and I can see we currently have a width of 9 inches. Okay, so I'm happy with that width. I'd like to give it a height of 7 inches, so I'm going to use the transform shortcut keys, whereby I'm going to type in 7 on the keyboard. You can see highlighted at the bottom there, and then when I press Y, it's going to create that ellipse for me, with a width of 9 inches and a height of 7. So let's just close that down. So let's go and tile our windows vertically so we can see the 2D view on the left and 3D view on the right hand side. Now we're going to go into the Modelling tab, and I'd like to import a model. So we're going to use the Import a Component or a 3D Model option. From the Creating a Dish Recess project folder, we're going to open the horsehead model.crv3d. Okay, so you can see it's been added there. What we want to do is put that in the centre of our dish, so let's just use the Align Selected Objects and align that to the centre of our material horizontally and vertically. We can close that down. With that horse selected, let's set the size of that. I'm going to give that a width of 7.7. Link XY is checked so all scales in proportion. Then we could go ahead, press apply there, and then we could close that down. So let's just check the Z heights for the horse's head. So with that selected, go into the properties form. Shape height, we're just going to increase that to 0.43. And we're also going to look at applying a very small base height of 0.05 in there. And so we have a combined value of 0.48. And so this total height is important, and we plan to put this model within a dish that's going to be 1/2 inch deep. So we need to make sure that the component in the dish is slightly smaller than the actual dish itself. So let's just close that down. When we create parts that are going to be recessed or dished below the modelling plane, then it's important that we have a component that represents that plane for the dished or recessed shape to merge with. And there's two reasons for this. One, it helps us to visualise the part, and two, it helps us to prevent some possible issues that we may have when it comes to machining, where it allows the software to better define the exact point where the recess or the dish shape meets with the surface of the material, which will ultimately result in a cleaner toolpath with a smooth machined surface. And so the most important thing to remember here is to actually create this zero plane. So to do that, I come over to the modelling tools, go over to this icon here and add a plane that has 0 height. Okay, so you'll see that our component has been added here to the component tree. You can see this here in the 3D view. Okay, so you'll see that when I hover over this area, you'll see displayed at the bottom there that we have a height of 0. Okay, you'll see in the 2D view we don't actually see the grayscale there, and that's because the software automatically creates a layer for the 0 plane that is switched off by default, and it's moved to the top of the layers list in order for us to prevent it from obscuring any component grayscales or vectors that we may already have visible in the 2D view. And so if we just switch that on, you can see that there. So I'm just going to turn that off for the time being. And so now we can go ahead and create the actual dish shape. So let's take that ellipse vector there. We're going to go into the modelling tools. We're going to use the Create Shape tool. So for this we're going to go with a curved profile and specify an angle 30 degrees in there. I'm going to scale this to an exact height of 1/2 inch. Okay, so my dish is going to be 1/2 inch deep. Could give that a name, we'll call this one dish, set the combine mode of that to subtract, and then I could simply go ahead and press apply. So let's just take a moment to discuss what we are seeing here. Now you'll notice that the majority of the newly created dish and the horse's head are actually a lighter colour. Now that lighter colour represents the modelling plane. So let's just close this down. And so let's just switch everything off that we've got here in level 1. And so you're probably more familiar with seeing the modelling plane at the start of a job like this. So this is our modelling plane, and all the shapes that we build start from this plane, whether we make positive or negative shapes. And so then what we did was we added in the 0 plane, which is a plane of material set to 0, which now obscures the modelling plane. And we're using this 0 plane to represent the modelling plane, as I mentioned earlier, to help us visualise the part and to help prevent machining issues. And so then what we've done is we've created a dish, which is now subtracting from the 0 plane. And so this shading that we can see represents components that are below our modelling plane, which is very useful as it helps us to define what components are above or below the modelling plane. And so if we switch the horse head model back on, interestingly we can see that there are areas of the horse that don't have this shading. So looking at the bottom of the neck, the brow, the ear and the tip of the nose, and that's because these areas are above the modelling plane. And so if we tilted the view, you can see that those areas are actually sticking out there. Now from a visual point of view, I want the horse head to sit well within the dish. So this really is a nice visual way to see if our model sits within our dish without it sticking out. So not only can we see the areas sticking above the 0 plane there, but we can also come over to the scale Z height of the model. We can see currently the maximum Z is at 0.1373. Now when we're working with dish shapes, the maximum Z height should be at 0. So let's just go ahead and OK that. Okay, so what we could do is we could make the model height of the horse smaller, or we could increase the angle of the dish. So let's just undraw the dish component for now. So let's select this vector here. I'm going to create another dish, so go back into the create shape form. This time we'll look at a steeper angle of 60 degrees, again scaling that to 1/2 inch. I'm going to call this one dish 60, set the combine mode of that to subtract, then we could go ahead and press apply. Okay, and then we could just close that down. Then what we could do is take that horse's head, I'm just going to right click, and in the 2D view we're just going to move that to the front so I can select it there. And then with that selected, I can just hold down shift and just make that a little bit smaller so it fits within the dish. And so you can see now we have no areas that are above that plane, and if I look at the y-axis we can see that there's no part of that horse sticking out there. And if we go over to the scale option, we can see that the maximum Z is at 0. Which is good, but we've compromised the design where we now have quite a big border and the dish is actually quite steep. Now we want to create a set of components that sits within the dish below the 0 plane at all times. Now there is a way to do this that requires us to use the multiply combine mode. So let's just go to edit, undo size, undo the create shape, and then we'll just switch the original dish back on. Now we're going to look at a function that allows us to multiply the relief. Now this is a rarely used function, but it does have a good application for this sort of situation. Now multiply works in the same way as other combine modes do. When we add a component to another component, then what we see in the 3D view is the result of the first component's pixels added on top of the second component's pixels. When we use the multiply, the same things happen. Instead of adding pixels, it will multiply them. In this case, we're going to take advantage of the fact that when we multiply anything by 0, we get 0. And when we multiply anything by 1, we always get the same thing. For example, 3 multiplied by 1 equals 3. Now this will become clearer as we work our way through this example. There are 3 key areas to look at when creating the perfect dish. 1 is the model in the dish, in this case the horse. 2, the multiply. 3, the actual dish shape itself. So to help ourselves, we're going to organise the component tree, whereby we're going to create more levels. We're just going to look at creating copies of some of our components and moving some things around. So let's just start by going to level 1, and we're just going to rename this level, and we're going to call this one horse. And then we're going to right click on the horse level. We're going to insert a new level. Right click on level 1, rename that level, and we're going to call this level multiply. Then we're going to right click on the multiply level and insert one final level there. Right click on level 1, rename that level, and we're going to call this level dish. So now we're going to take the dish component, hold down shift, and we're going to select the zero plane component, and we're going to move these components into the dish level. And with these components selected, I'm going to right click and we're going to create a duplicate of these components. So you can see they've been created there. And I'm actually going to move these duplicate components into the multiply level. Okay, so we have a horse level that has our horse model. We have a dish level that has the dish and the zero plane. And then we've got a multiply level that also has a copy of the dish and a copy of the zero plane in that multiply level. So we're just going to switch off the horse level. We're just going to switch off the dish level. We're just going to focus on this multiply level. So we're just going to look at this dish component. So let's go into the properties of that component there. Now this shape is going to be part of our multiplying process, and what we want this component to do is go from 0 at the edge where it would meet the zero plane to 1 at the highest point in the centre of the dish, so that when we apply the multiply, anything at the edge of the dish will be 0 because anything multiplied by 0 is 0, and anything in the centre will remain the same as it will be multiplied by 1. So to do this, we need to change the combine mode of this so it's set to add, so it's now a positive shape. Then what we need to do is alter the shape height so it's exactly 1. Now it doesn't matter if you're working in inches or millimetres, the value will always be 1. So let's just change the name of this, and we're going to call this one dome, and then we could just simply close that down. So now let's look at changing the combine mode of the multiply level to turn it to multiply. So right click on the level, go to the combine mode and use the multiply option. So you'll see that everything has disappeared here in the 3D view because it's the only level that we have switched on, and there's nothing in the list. It's multiplying everything by 0, and that's why we can't see anything here. Now if we just switch the multiply level off, we're just going to switch on the horse level. We're just going to maximise the 3D view. We're just going to take a look at this horse model up the y-axis. So now if we switch on the multiply level, you'll notice that the horse has now changed and that the edges of the horse are now tapering down. And that's because we have this dome that is multiplying from 1 in the centre to 0 at the edge. And so it's creating this effect where it's fading out the object over the surface of that dome. Now because we used a copy of our dish to create this dome, then it's going to fade at the same rate as the dish curvature goes down. And so if we switch on the dish level, we can see that it's modified the horse's head component enough that it will sit perfectly within our dish shape. And we can clearly see that here in the 3D view, and that the whole horse head is sat below the plane here. And if we were to cut this, we wouldn't face any flat spots. So we could put this in Z, and again just to double check we could come over to scale Z height of model, and we can see that the maximum Z is at 0 and everything is sat below the actual 0 plane and will be machined as a negative shape so that we don't end up with any flat spots. So let's just OK that. So this can be a difficult concept to understand, but if you follow the steps here then it will work. The key things to remember are the components that you want to put in the dish needs to be slightly smaller than the dish itself. The dome in the multiply level needs to be an exact copy of the dish that we're using, and it needs to become a positive shape going from 0 to 1 unit high at its highest point. A nice thing that we can do now with this setup is to alter the composition if we wanted to. So let's just go and tile our windows vertically, and then I'm going to select the horse component, right click, 2D preview. I'd like to move that to the front. Okay, so we could just select that horse and I could just move it over to the right hand side. And you'll see here, if I just look in the 3D view, we've got a really nice effect, as the multiply means that the horse doesn't come over the 0 plane as it's being multiplied by 0 here. If I wanted to, I could take that horse and we could look at making that bigger. And so where we have made the horse bigger, we've naturally scaled up the Z height as well. And so the really nice thing about seeing this model in plane is that we can see areas that go over it. And as I've mentioned before, I want the horse's head to sit well within the dish. So if you alter the size of the components that are sat within the dish, ensure that you check over the properties to make sure they're no bigger than the depth of your dish. So let's do that. So we'll take that horse, go into the properties form, I'm going to change the shape height of this to 0.43, and then we're going to change the base height here to 0.05, and then we can close that down. We can see visually there in the 3D view nothing is coming over that modelling plane. And then if we go over to scale Z height of model, we can see we have a maximum Z there of 0. Now if you wanted to replace the horse's head with a different component or a variety of components, you can do. Just make it a little smaller than the dish shape, and then you can guarantee that they would fit within the dish because of the multiplying level. So at this stage we're just going to save this file. So go to File, Save As, and in the project folder it's called dish_3D_modeling. Press save and you can access this model from the project folder. So now we're going to look at some of the things that are important when calculating the toolpath for a dished or recessed model. So let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab, and the first and most important thing we need to do is go into our material setup. So we're working with 3/4 inch material, going to set the XY position in the lower left hand corner. A few factors in here that are important when setting up a dished or recessed model. Firstly is our Z0 and where we set that to. In this case it's going to be on the material surface, as this will allow us to very accurately set where the face of your material is that your dish is going to be machined down into. And that's going to give you the best chance of getting a nice crisp edge of your part. Next is the model position in material. In this case we're going to have a gap above our model of 0, and so ultimately we're just going to force the edge of the dish to the surface of our material. Okay, then you just check over the rapid Z gaps, home and start position, ensuring that they're safe and appropriate for what you're doing, and then we could go ahead and press OK. Depending on the material and the size of the part you're tooling, you may need to do both a roughing and finishing pass. In a lot of cases with a dish model, you'll find that a finishing pass on its own will work for you. When you do a finishing pass, the only time that you load the cutter up is on the first pass. Typically, you don't want to bury to a nice deep depth and then run it along with the full force of the material on the tool, because it will snap. In this case, with a dish, your first pass is almost going to be on the surface of your material, and so it's barely going to be taking any material, and after that it's just going to be running back and forth, only shaving off the distance of the step over. And so the force of the tool is much less than you get with normal 3D toolpaths. So you must make sure that this is safe for your setup, and in this case we're just going to assume that it's okay for our example. So let's select the vector, the ellipse here that represents our dish. And with that vector selected, let's come over to the 3D finishing toolpath. First thing we need to do is select a tool. Okay, the tool I want to use is actually currently selected, the 1/8 inch ball nose. So let's just double check over the settings using the edit option here. Okay, I'm happy with the step over and all of the other options in here. Then we could go ahead and press OK. Machine limit boundary, we're going to use the vector that we've got selected here and ensure that we do not apply an offset. Okay, so we want the center of our tool to reach the outline of our dish shape using this vector here. Then we move on to the area machine strategy. Now, to make sure that I'm going to be safe cutting the dish without a roughened toolpath, I'm going to select the Raster Strategy. If we use the offset, then there's the potential that it may need to lift up and move to another position in the part. If we select Raster, it won't do that, as it will just start from the bottom and work its way up to the top, just going back and forth. So then we could just give that a name. We'll just call this one 3D Finish. Then we could go ahead and calculate that. Okay, and so we can see the toolpath there, and then we could just go ahead and simulate the actual preview of our dished model once it's been cut out. Okay, so you can see it's taking a little bit of time because we are using a small tool here and it's got a lot of detail to pick up on. And so there we have our finished preview. Okay, so if I'm happy with that, I could go ahead and close this down, and then we could just look at saving out that toolpath. So we'd go to Save, and then we'd select the 3D finish there. Just picked up that ball nose, and we could choose our post processor and then save out that toolpath, and then we could go ahead and just run that on our machine. And so that completes this tutorial. So let's go and save this file. So go to File, Save As, and in the Project folder we're going to call this one Dish 3D Toolpaths. Press Save, and you can access that from the Project folder.